Yeah, you were talking about some really interesting things, and let's start with Governor Northam at this point. Um, what would you tell him right now?
Well, I had a chance to talk to him and exchange a few messages, and first and foremost, I just told him I was praying for he and Pam and his family. I mean, I know a little bit of what it's like to be under the gun with the media on narratives that you think may not be fair, but still having to govern day to day. I've told him to be humble and just let people know who he is. I mean, the Ralph Northam that stood with me a month ago at a press conference to proclaim 2019 the year of reconciliation and civility is a man that is a governor for all people, not what might be portrayed in a 35-year-old picture. And so I told him, look, Virginians are very forgiving. Tell the truth, and then be a leader on this issue. I mean, that's what I would tell him, and I think that seems to be what he's done this last week. He's done a lot of things very proactively to learn, to engage, to express remorse, repentance, and how he can be a better leader because of this, and I think he's right.
Should he resign his office?
I don't think so. I mean, he was elected by 10 points by the will of the people. And yes, these pictures are horrific. They're offensive. They're reprehensible and have no place in modern America. But we can't run from, in a way, we have a very tainted history in Virginia. 400 years ago, the first African American enslaved people landed right here at Fort Monroe, capital of the Confederacy. We were the epicenter of the slave trail in Richmond for 50, 60 years. The Devil's Half Acre, Lumpkin's Jail, within stone's throw of the Capitol. And then we have the horrific legacy of the slavery abomination and Jim Crow and massive resistance. So it's not pretty, but we have to be honest about it and then say, okay, well, we also have the nation's first black governor. We have a civil rights memorial on the state capitol, and we've been pretty progressive on civil rights since the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So we should celebrate the achievements, but realize that we have a long ways still to go. The context of that picture, people like me that grew up in a white neighborhood, went to white schools, I wouldn't have understood how deeply offensive pictures like that were to people when I was a kid, 30, 40 years ago. So, Tom, I look at the bright side of this, and that is that Virginia, in this 400th year of having African American citizens here in this state and in this nation, have a remarkable opportunity to do truth telling, to acknowledge the history and how horrific the abominable institution of slavery is. And now, 170 years later, what now? What do we do now to make this a more just and equitable society? What do we do now to make sure, frankly, white people are educated about how offensive some of these things are to people of color? And then how do we actually build bridges, have better communications, and try to move forward? I mean, that's the reason we started this Virginians for Racial Reconciliation program 9 months ago, and we've had a number of great activities that we're recommending that people in the church and business and the political realm and arts, culture participate in this year. Change moves at the speed of trust. And until people actually can trust one another and talk openly about this, knowing there's going to be disagreements, but knowing there's going to be a lot of education, that to me is a remarkable opportunity for Virginia in 2019 to lead the nation on this topic.
There's a strong sense of irony, though, with that, and I'm going to go to social media, too, partially, and our political culture we have. It seems that both sides are moving farther and farther to the fringe, the right and the left. How can we get past this and begin this reconciliation that you're hoping for if both sides seem so far apart on some of the most basic issues and keep moving further to the right and to the left?
It's a great question. And the answer is there's a spectacular opportunity for statesmen to rise up in 2019 and try to bring people together based on the common core values that made this country great, that we were built on 240 years ago. Now, our founders, many of them were slave owners. Inexcusable, reprehensible, what they wrote in the Constitution about African Americans being only 3/5 of a person. Dred Scott, horrible, who was from Virginia, by the way. Horrible parts of our history. Beyond race, there is a level of incivility and lack of manners and hyper-partisanship and horrific tone of the political debate in Washington that even transcends race. It's very little willingness to cooperate, to learn from one another, to listen to one another. I mean, they go to vote in Congress and they don't even normally hear the debate of the other side. You know, like we do in the General Assembly, you sit there and you listen and you might learn something and vote. Not so anymore. Congress for 3 days, go home and campaign for 3 days, talk bad about the other guys, and then come back and fight some more. 2/3 of the districts in Congress aren't competitive anymore because of hyperpartisan redistricting. So there are some structural problems that lead to the incivility and the toxic tone of American politics today. I think the race issue is part and parcel of that, but it goes deeper because it goes back 400 years. I'd say statesmen need to rise up. People that love our country more than they love power and politics, that they love policy more. And I think there's people like that, but they're sort of taking a back seat to the identity politics that we have, where it's party first. You got to support the team as opposed to the people in the country. And I think it's only been the last 20 years we've gotten that way. You remember Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill would sit down and work out deals. Even Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton in the late 90s on welfare reform, on business issues. I mean,
and there was the Virginia Way, you know.
Yeah, I still think that's, I know it's taken a little hit this week. I mean, we're the mother of presidents and the cradle of democracy, and so it deeply saddens me as one of those guys that had Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson's job as governor, to see us being mocked truly around the globe. But that's not Virginia. That's not emblematic of virtually all of the public servants, black or white, Republican or Democrat, that serve in our legislature. They're people of goodwill that really do want to do the best for Virginia. But I do think that's a silver lining in this cloud now that the governor's made a decision and I think the right decision to keep his job and to redouble his efforts to make sure that it's a Virginia for all peoples, regardless of race, creed, color, income, is going to be, I think, a chance for repentance, forgiveness, redemption, which is a great American value, and a chance for reconciliation. And the dialogue this year is going to be much deeper. I just know in my own life, just listening to people talk now, they want to talk about this in a way that they were either afraid of or just weren't interested in before. So it's a good opportunity.
So you think that there's a bright side to all of this,
I do.
Being that it has brought people out and given them more of a forum to be honest about how they feel about race relations here in Virginia?
I do. Because some people shy away from it, especially in the political or business realm, because it's uncomfortable. And they're afraid of using the wrong words that might offend one group or person or the other. Others don't talk about it because maybe in their workplace they've actually created a beautiful integrated environment where everybody feels equally worthwhile in the workplace. And some don't talk about it because it's just, for whatever, it's not important to them. But I think all those things now have been sort of stripped away by the nature of the dialogue in Virginia. It's the reason we started Virginians for Reconciliation, is because we knew there were going to be commemorations this year, the first African Americans, the first women, the first Thanksgiving, the first General Assembly. 1619 was a big year at Jamestown, Virginia. But I knew that most of it was going to be ceremonial and commemorative, but not digging down at the deep stuff in the hard truth telling of the abomination of slavery and its ugly legacy of Jim Crow and massive resistance and things like that. But so this group was aimed at talking about those issues, getting people, black and white, to do things like read the color of law about the nature of our legal system. Is it colorblind or not? To have a pulpit exchange program where black and white pastors could exchange in church, to walk the Richmond Slave Trail and see what it was like for those people 200 years ago to walk to Lumpkin's jail and then be sold as chattel. I mean, that's what we want people to do. When you start to understand what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, then you can actually move to real substantive solutions in public policy, and that's the goal.
And you talk about colorblind. It brings me to Martin Luther King, who said, "Judge not a man by the color of his skin, by the content of his character."
Exactly.
And there are many today who believe that we're not living in a colorblind society, that we are judging people by their identity, hence identity politics.
Yes.
So have we swung the other way, as opposed to being colorblind, like it doesn't matter if you're white or you're black or you're red or you're brown or you're yellow. I see you as an American and American first. Are we losing that label American to the other subsets that have emerged in our culture?
Boy, Tom, you were asking, I think, one of the most important questions in our country today. We have a lot of hyphenated Americans. We have a lot of people that maybe only identify with their own core group or their own party or their own whatever. And, you know, I remember Reagan asked the question saying, if you agree with me 80% of the time, you're my friend. And what we have now with a lot of groups is if you disagree with me 5% of the time, you're my enemy. Well, that is a sea change from the Reagan standard of 30 years ago.
Not long ago.
Not long ago at all. And so I don't know if people are just crankier in 2019 than they were in the good old 80s, but I think we have to remember things like George Washington's 110 Rules of Civility that he wrote when he was 16 years old. And that is, look, we're all created in the image and likeness of God. The Declaration says that we all have inalienable rights from our Creator. We are all equal. It's a fundamental nature of America. And you know what, Tom? Whether we're a reporter or a politician, we're all flawed. We all make mistakes. We all sin. We're all in need of forgiveness and repentance for some of the things that we've done, our biases, our prejudices. We all have the garbage in our life we need to clean out. And I mean, that's the kind of discussion we need to have as human beings, to not be so quick to judge. You know, all the national politicians, they couldn't run fast enough to condemn Northam and throw him out of office, you know, just for, I think, for political reasons, instead of really understanding who the man was. So I just think it's a great chance to really be honest about our own self. You know, Jesus said, he who was without sin cast the first stone. We ought to think about those things before we hurl, and let's find a way to get to know each other better and solve problems. That's the American way and the Virginia way.
And now we have Justin Fairfax,
yeah.
Different level. We're talking about criminal accusations against him by two women, some of whom say that those are credible accusations. We're not sure yet. There's been no investigation done as of this point. What should happen in that case? What do you think?
You know, one thing I really don't like is criminal cases being tried in the press. You know, I experienced that a little bit in my life 5 years ago. So that's terribly unfair, because it undermines this fundamental American value of due process. So I like Justin Fairfax himself, has called for an investigation. I think that's the minimum that could be done. That would have to be done by the states in which these allegations took place, not the FBI, not Virginia. But these are, you're right, these are not just serious allegations. These are criminal allegations. I mean, felonies that could carry life in prison. So it's something that has to be taken extremely seriously. You know, it's interesting, the Kavanaugh standard that was set a while back is really not the due process standard. So I think Justin, who earned the trust of the people to get elected, and federal prosecutor, by all accounts, a good, well-respected person, deserves that presumption of innocence. But he's got very credible accusations, and in the right forum will have a lot of answering to do. If he believes at some point that he can no longer garner the trust of the people of Virginia, then he should step down. You can't serve, you can't stay in that job, any of those jobs, if you don't have the trust of the people.
So there is a higher standard for people who serve in public life, being that if you can't govern, even if you're innocent of the charges, if you cannot muster support even in your own party, then that's a problem.
I think it is. Now, governor, there is a real day-to-day critically important job. Lieutenant governor presides over the Senate, but other than that, it's essentially a part-time job. So that standard for him on whether he can do that job, which is primarily during the legislative session, is one. Although he would be the next in line if something happened to the governor or the governor resigned. So that's got to be part of the calculus as well. So I think Mr. Fairfax is, from all accounts, I don't know him very well, seems to be have a life of public service, but he has to answer that question now, or whether he'll wait for an investigation to come up with the facts and evaluate the credibility of the accusers. But I don't think it's fair to anybody to solely have their case tried in the press, because it's not going to have all the information. It's generally not going to be balanced. It's generally going to be negative towards the public official. That's just the way things seem to be. But these are things of all those are the ones that have to be seriously evaluated, I think, by law enforcement.
You see anything in common, like with what you've gone through and what Governor Northam and Justin Fairfax are going through now? Just,
I do understand the sense of pain and hurt when you've worked hard to garner the trust of the people. You have a convincing win, as he had, and I was fortunate to have. You have a lot of positive things that you've done during, in my case, 38 years of public service, and then have allegations that you believe with all your heart are not accurate. But you still have to explain and account to the people for what's been reported. So I do feel for him, which is my first reaction was to tell him on Friday morning, February 1st, Ralph, I'm praying for you. And I called him and told him that. I didn't want to be his advisor, political advisor, but I just wanted him to know that there were people out there that care about him because he's the leader of the government of Virginia. And we want the government to succeed. 110,000 employees depend on his leadership. So I know he gave this serious consideration over the last week about what's the right thing to do. Can he keep the confidence of his cabinet and staff, and can he regain the trust of people who were deeply hurt by those horrific, offensive pictures? And I think after a lot of meetings with people, political and ministers and others, he decided that he could. And I think only him in his heart really knows, can he do that? And it seems to be the right decision. And he will be in a much better position now to lead on these issues in 2019 in accordance with the resolution that he signed, to make this the year of reconciliation and civility in Virginia, which are noble goals.
And one has to wonder about the two accounts we got from the governor.
Yeah.
First, I'm sorry for the picture, and then, no, that's not me. A lot of people cringe when they heard that.
I don't blame them. Completely inconsistent. Obviously didn't have all the facts. Probably didn't get very good advice from his own counselors and media on what to do. I've learned a little bit about crisis management during campaigns and otherwise, and the best thing to do is generally look people in the eye and tell them the truth. I just have to believe maybe that the governor really didn't know whether that was him in the picture, which still sort of hard to believe, but if he really didn't know, is the only way that I can account for the difference. I know he's got a legal team and some investigators really looking into what happened at EVMS, how that picture got on his page, and who's in there to jog his memory. And I think, once all the facts are known and publicly disclosed, people can then make further judgments about what they think.